Hello, Zana, and many congratulations on your fabulous book. I have been very moved by the book and found it just a compelling read, but also something so unique in all our bookshelves. I cannot think of any other author in present times who has tackled the kind of issues and ideas and your narrative style in the manner you've done. So I wanted to start with a sentence that you bring up at the end of the book, and that is, stories are maps of what we can be. Am I quoting correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I think it might be how we can be, but effectively, and I this is something which I really believe to be so true, because for me, certainly, personally, and also as an author, I think stories are the ways that we can imagine ourselves in the world. We can experiment and explore the world around us from a very, very safe space. And we can also explore sort of the type of people we want to be, the characters we respond to. We can put ourselves into positions which we wouldn't naturally be in, and we can think and empathise and wonder how we might respond in that situation. And for me, stories are, whether they're oral stories or folk tales or books, they are such a strong way of working out who we are and finding our identity.
And then, as you say, how we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, it's not always about who you are, because who you are is always changing and always maturing and morphing, and you can always not change who you are deep inside, but you can explore your identity, and you can explore the kind of person you want to be. And especially for young people, when they're at the age I write for, they're thinking of the future, and they're thinking of the kind of world they're going to live in, and as part of that, they're thinking of the kind of adult they want to be, and the things that matter to them, and all of that, I think, is so important to show through story.
Yeah. And because it's such a good story, I think young minds will, the young and old minds will read to the end, and you don't prescribe, you don't say this is what you could be. You just find yourself in
absolutely.
These ways.
And that's really important to me, is that I never want any of my books to push any issue or agenda. It's just I'm sort of like laying out the facts. And when I was working in schools as an integration aide and a teacher, that was very much laying out the facts and allowing kids to come to it themselves and explore the material in their own way.
Yes. So I'm going to quote you a Melville quote, which is on one of the mugs in our bookshop, and it says, "It is not down in any maps. True places never are." So your settings that you've made in this book are very gritty, very dark. There is light. There's always light in all the crossings and in the hope. There's always light there. So these places that you map out, are they real places that you've been to?
Not really, no. They're usually a mashup of various places that I've been to that sort of come together in my own mind. The setting, so the Lost Soul Atlas takes place in the afterlife, but then also in the real world. And that real world setting was really, for me, it was almost how I imagined any of our modern cities could become. So that sort of dark, gritty, urban environment. I feel very much so that if we continue going down a path of denying climate change and everything else, and we could very easily end up that way. So it was half imagination, half research into countries that aren't perhaps as wealthy as we are here, and just looking at cities and all cities and what we can become.
Yeah, because these places do exist.
Exactly.
And they have existed partly because of colonialism, partly because of inequality, partly because of climate emergency, partly because of lack of just basic stuff, just books to read, medicine to have,
Absolutely.
clean water.
Yep.
And so I think now where we live in a cocoon, in a bubble, we
Yeah.
are becoming very aware, and because of this present situation that we are in, we all become very connected to this.
Absolutely.
So in your mind, what kind of a reader do you see picking up your book?
That's interesting, because when I'm writing, I don't think of the readers at all. It's very much the story and the characters who are driving it. However, I did want to make this a fun, an adventure story, very much so. So for me, I mean, anyone from sort of age 10, 11 and upwards. I've had readers of all different ages so far reading it.
67.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And coming back with really wonderful feedback. In fact, sort of the best of all of my books I've written, I think. So that's wonderful, because I think of all of my books, it's the one I've poured the most of myself into. And I don't think I realised while I was doing it, but I was mining, all my memories and emotions, and especially that sort of coming of age emotion that you hold on to, and that it's so powerful. I really went deep and mined that, and all the things that you feel, all the big feels. It was all very much about huge emotion, and how you get through that, and how you deal with it, and how you deal with other people's perception of you, and that struggle to find your own identity.
And dreams, because there's so much that can only happen in a dream. So much sequencing in this that feels palpably like, I wouldn't call them nightmares. Sometimes they are, because then when your heart beats fast when you're reading your book, you think you're in the middle of a nightmare.
Yeah.
But they are really dream-like sequences. So did you mind your dreams as well? Just as a writer?
I always mind my dreams as an author, but I think actually what saved this book, there was something not working with it. So I was almost, I was sort of quite a long way through the drafting, and there was something that wasn't right. And what saved me was turning to folklore and fairy tales. And once I worked that out, there was something someone said that sparked, and I said, yes, that's what's missing, that sort of folkloric way of telling. And I went back, and I really love folklore and fairy tale. I went back to all my folklore books, and I spent a day just immersed. And then by the end of that day, I had a poster page full of ideas and images and things that I just knew would immediately fix what was missing, and put the thing in there that I hadn't found yet. And that was really powerful and really strong. And it was that sense of, it's the old stories, they've got a lot to tell us, and they're still very, very relevant.
I think it's the manner in which they're being told. They are a little bit raw, they're a little bit repetitive, and they are a little like songs.
Yeah, and they're a little bit dark.
Dark, yeah, of course they're dark.
Yeah.
And that's another thing in your book, is the rhythm, that you're telling your story, and there are two narrative threads in the book, and they are quite complex. So when you're reading it, you have to kind of go from one thing to another, and if you missed a few days reading, then you have to remember. But there's no problem because of the beat. You have a rhythm and a beat. So tell me a bit more about getting to that point, where you can write like that.
That's interesting, because I do, towards the end of the editing process, I do read some bits out loud and listen for the rhythm and the beat, but it's very much an internal, as I'm writing, the rhythm of words. And I love playing with language, as you know, Meera. So that rhythm and the oral quality of words is really important to me as a writer. And so I think that's always going through my mind when I'm writing. I'm always listening for that rhythm and for that beat. And I think that, honestly, that comes from reading a lot of books. And I was always reading when I was a kid. And before I've got terrible eyesight. And so before we found out I needed glasses, I couldn't see anything, any further away than this. So I would always have my head in a book, and it wasn't until I was 7 that we discovered I needed glasses. So that was really my childhood, was reading. And so I have these wonderful voices of other authors in my head, and I always have, and I've always loved that, and I think that's where it comes from. You know, I didn't do any creative writing course at university or anything. I often wish I had, but it's all from reading. And the authors that I really loved were often South American authors like Isabel Allende, who also have that really beautiful song-like quality to their writing.
Yeah, so would you like to talk at this point then, because when I'm reading this book, I can see in my mind's eye a lot of different writers, you know, and I had guessed that you were a big reader. But can you sort of say what are some of the other literary and other books, it doesn't have to be literary, any other books that you have read that kind of playing a backdrop or a back song in your head when you're writing this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was, I'm trying to think early on who I mean, so from the children's books, Terry Pratchett I've only just discovered, and I love Terry Pratchett. So you can certainly, I mean, when my kids read this, they said, "Oh, this is very, you know, you've stolen this from Discworld." And I said, "Yes, quite openly have I stolen this from Discworld." So I'm very influenced by Terry Pratchett, and I think having just discovered him, I'm especially enthusiastic about his work. But also, like I said, a lot of the folklore authors and short stories as well.
Yes.
So Lucy Wood is a wonderful short story author. Who else? Kelly Link, and they tell these really amazing, sort of almost surreal short stories, which really resonate with me. Who else was I reading? Lanny by Max Porter, I loved.
Yes.
Grief is a Thing with Feathers, although I read that quite a while before I started writing this, but I'm sure that crow character was in my head as well. The Mere Wife by Maria Headley, that was amazing, and again it was that kind of dance between folklore and fairy tale and real world as well.
Now, your love of language, you know, obviously some of names and characters got wonderful names, Hoblin and the riddles that you use. What do you think of their part in children's literature or in older people's, to learn, to find new words in our...
I love playing with language, and you know, it's one of the things when I'm doing workshops with kids in schools, is the first thing I go in and talk about is how language is there to be played with and explored. And anyone who tells you, you know, you can't begin a sentence with but is completely wrong. You know, let's begin sentences with but if that's what the sentence needs. So it's very much about playing, you know, and having that, and that's one of the reasons I love riddles as well, because there's often that double meaning or the sort of pun-like quality as well, and metaphors, and it's just something that excites me. You know, we've got so many wonderful ways of expressing things, and not with necessarily unusual words, but with the ordinary words that we can make extraordinary by putting them in curious ways and curious patterns.
So do you think you're adding to the dictionary? Because how would we use it? How would we use it in Scrabble? I mean, people would fight with me if I used...
That's an excellent question, because I often say words which are not real words just when I'm talking, because, you know, my brain can't find the exact word that I'm looking for. And my family always tease me about this, but my response now is I'll put it in a book and then it's a real word.
That's right, yeah. So you need a glossary then,
yeah, that's right.
The dictionary. Yeah. So I think that's what language is about, and what children can bring to their life and to their world.